So pleased to be with you today and to start a brand new 7-part series on first century Israel. What I am most excited about is that you will hear some authentic foundational truths that are imperative to your accurate understanding of what was really happening in the land of Israel when Yeshua was on earth, when he was in his ministry, teaching and speaking. To understand some of these things is to understand behind the scenes what was going on, so that when you read the Word of God, when you interpret, when you teach, you will have an accurate foundational truth. And you'll be interpreting from the first century what was going on, what was the climate, what were all the things that were behind the scenes that led up to what Yeshua was saying and how he was saying it, and what was the message that he was trying to give to the people, which is the same message that he was giving to you and I. So to talk about first century Israel, the first thing we need to talk about is the language that Israelis used among themselves. Israeli Jew to Israeli Jew. Now, why am I saying Israeli? Because there were a number of Jews in first century Israel that had moved back to Israel, but were raised in other places. For instance, Paul lived a number of years in Rome, and so he had Roman influences in his thinking, and in his Greek writings. The earliest manuscripts show that he had a very good grasp of the Greek language and some Roman, which became Latin, concepts later on, around the 4th century, when Jerome translated the Bible from Greek and Hebrew into Latin. We understand that there were a number of Jews who moved back to Israel just before the really difficult onslaught of the Romans, just as Yeshua was coming on the scene, up until the complete destruction of the land of Israel that was accumulated between the years of 135 AD and 170. And 70 AD was a horrible season in the land of Israel. But when I talk about first century, I'm talking about from the year 1 to the year 100. And Yeshua was on earth we know from records that he was born about the 4th year. So from the year 4 to the year 38, 39, around in there, those are the years that Yeshua was on the earth. Now, there were 2 prominent rabbis who were setting the religious tone in Israel. Rabbi Hillel, Rabbi Shammai. They had their predecessors before them who taught them, and they had a very strong hand in the structure of Israel, the religious climate. And today, we're going to talk about the role of the Hebrew language, because many Christians say, he spoke Aramaic. Well, yes, the Lord knew every language that ever was and ever will be, because he was God in the flesh. But Israeli to Israeli was always Hebrew. Now, if that's true, there should be facts to back it up. Well, what do you know? There are. We have thousands of first century documents. They're in the Israel Museum. They're well documented. They're held in secure places, of simple transactions, simple conversations in the land of Israel, proving that Hebrew was a lingua franca of the day in Israel when it was between Israeli Jew and Israeli Jew. Because there are thoughts and concepts that can only be conveyed accurately inside the Hebrew language. If you take those thoughts and concepts and put them in another language, you're moving cultural foundational truths. And it's like this. If I say I love you in English, and then I say te quiero in Spanish, or je t'aime in French, the meanings are very, very different. In French, it has a whole flavor and feeling, and te quiero in Spanish has a whole different dimension than I love you in English. Same thing with Hebrew. And so Hebrew has always been the language of heaven. Lashon ha-kodesh. That is the word for holy language. That's what Hebrew is known as. And so, back to our evidence. From all different sites, the sites that are being excavated in Israel, archaeological digs, they have first century documents. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands are written in the Hebrew language, showing, not just for religious talk, but for everyday conversation, Hebrew was the language from Jew to Jew. Now, if someone came into the room or into the group and their first language was not Hebrew because they weren't raised in Israel or they weren't raised by Israeli parents, then the conversation may switch to Aramaic, which most Jews knew from all over the world. They knew because of the dispersion into Babylon. They retained an understanding of the Aramaic language. But the Lord, if you know the Lord, if he had a choice from the language of Babylon or the language of heaven, what do you think he chose? That's right, Hebrew. In Yale University, a great doctoral dissertation was written, and it was by a man named William Chomsky. He wrote Hebrew, the eternal language. Hebrew, and he said in this, that Hebrew is the mother of all languages, and that it was used specifically in the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, because it was the purest way to communicate Yahweh's heart for Adam and Chava, Eve, and for the animals, and for the plants and the living world, the colors, the shapes, the sizes. And Yahweh loves creation. He loves every speck of dust, every particle inside every speck of dust. He loves every blade of grass. He loves every leaf on a tree. He loves every color, every size, every dimension, all depths, all heights, all widths, all the breadth of creation. And he loves us above his love for creation.